Hi, everyone. It's Alex Savage from KTVU, Fox 2 News in the San Francisco Bay Area. And we want to talk about some of the latest headlines in the coronavirus outbreak. And to do that, we bring in Dr. Vanila Singh, who is a clinical professor at Stanford School of Medicine and former chief medical officer with the Department of Health and Human Services. Dr. Singh, good to see you once again.
Great to be on. Thank you, Alex.
We've talked a lot about these variants that are spreading in different parts of the world, and some that have now arrived here in the U.S. And always the question has been, how effective do we think the vaccine is going to be against these different variants? And there's some data out today this sort of is raising some eyebrows and maybe raising some concern in some circles. It sounds like there's new data that is basically showing that the vaccines, two new vaccines that are about to come online, one from Novavax and one from Johnson and Johnson, they appear to be less effective against the South African variant of the coronavirus. What is the data showing here, and what do you think about what it all means?
Yeah, so this is such an important topic and kind of actually something that we all are likely a bit concerned about, and maybe our worst fears in some ways, that if the virus, COVID-19 virus, mutates and has changes, and those new variants of that virus come about, will that vaccine that we are all seeing from Moderna, Pfizer, and other companies on the horizon be as effective against these new variants? And as you mentioned, the South African variant is actually concerning in terms of the recent results from both the Novavax trial, which included over 4,000 people in South Africa who were mostly all found to have the variant, as well as over 6,000 folks in the upcoming Johnson and Johnson trials that also had mostly the South African variant. And both trials showed that the virus, which is highly effective against the current COVID-19 virus as it stands, had decreased effectiveness against the variant from South Africa, meaning the mutated virus that is found in South Africa, all the way down to between 40+% to 50+% in the Johnson and Johnson. What does this mean? It means that there's certainly an indication that is reasonable enough, that's credible enough, that we have to be concerned about these mutations found in the South African variant and perhaps others eventually, which we don't hope to happen, but have to be monitored, that makes us have to consider further actions to really combat this.
Um, what is happening with the South African variant that is seemingly not allowing the vaccine to be as effective against that particular strain? Because in the Novavax clinical trial, for example, they found the vaccine was 90% effective among trial participants in the UK, where obviously, as we've talked about, there's that variant that we call the UK strain because it first surfaced there, but 90% efficacy is pretty good. And you imagine that obviously a lot of the folks who are getting that vaccine in the UK clinical trial obviously are testing positive for that variant. But what is it that you think is so much more concerning, and what is different about the South African strain that might be causing this difference?
Yeah, so look, this is all a great review kind of for folks because we are all interested and glued to our seats really every day with the emerging topics. But all of the viruses have some deletion or mutations that happen when the virus enters a person. Most of those have no significant consequence, but the mutations that have occurred in the UK strain, the South African strain, and the Brazilian strain all affect the very famous spike protein that's on this virus. That spike protein is important because our antibodies, through the vaccines and natural infection, are programmed to recognize that spike protein and then create the immune system response against it. These mutations change that spike protein either in how it is receiving the vaccination or the antibodies or how it looks. And therefore, our immune system, when it changes a little bit, in some cases of these variants, can't recognize that protein anymore. Therefore, it can't fight it, or can't fight it as effectively is really the appropriate thing. And so that those kinds of mutations that are occurring naturally, but capture it and then are spread on, gain more traction. And what we really have to do is, number one, get folks vaccinated. And this is really a means for people to understand that vaccination is highly, highly important, to not waste the opportunity if given, to get in line to find out how they can do it, but also for Moderna, Pfizer, and others in the government to really consider if in fact booster doses are going to be necessary to combat these new variants, or do we already start the research and development of other vaccines?
Yeah. Do you worry though when people start to, there's already that sort of hesitancy among a certain segment of the population about taking the vaccine, and then do you get concerned from your standpoint as a medical expert, a public health expert, that people start to hear about strains and the vaccine not being as effective against these different strains of the virus, and people sort of just throwing up their hands and saying, well, what's the use in me getting the vaccine?
Yeah, absolutely. I am absolutely concerned about that from a public health perspective, but also from an individual health perspective. The risk people are taking by not getting vaccinated is a risk to their own health. There's no doubt about it. The risk of COVID right now, with the transmissibility, the contagious nature of it, and the morbidity, mortality that we're seeing, if you are vulnerable, is much higher than the understanding from our clinical trials and now our broad public use of the vaccines. So you really should take it for your individual health, but also from a public health perspective. If you think about it, the more people who get it, the more likely that we can actually really crush the surge that we saw in January, especially, but it's certainly in the winter months. That's how we slow it down and we're able to actually contain it. It also helps our fight against the variants, because you slow down the COVID-19, how many people are exposed to it. You also slow down the chances of further mutations, more variants, more problems in an ongoing situation.
Are you, when we look at these variants, and how significant some of these mutations have been, in some of the different strains, has this happened faster than you would have expected?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we expect, we as in, scientists, physicians, just people who are taking an interest in this, expect that there's going to be some genetic drift, some change in genetics. This is part and parcel of how, these infectious organisms react. But that it would take hold to a mutation that would actually have some consequence this soon on how easy it is to transmit, it is concerning. It shows also the rapid nature of it. Over 100 million people have had it worldwide, and so it's actually obviously gone much further out. And it's really about containing it. We have to contain the pandemic, and the most important step in that is to follow the guidelines and get vaccinated as soon as possible. We need our country to, of course, get the logistics in order. It's not really to blame, but to look and see where we have to improve it. That's why there's calls by a lot of companies. Albertsons is one of them that has offered to help with the vaccination effort. We need to do that as we secure more vaccine doses.
Yeah, this is sort of that race against the variants that we've talked about here. I mean, get as many people vaccinated as you can before those variants really start to take hold and spread more rapidly. All right, so as we wrap up here, I mean, let's just sort of talk about the implications. And you touched on it a little bit, but when you have these concerns about the vaccine not being as effective against certain strains, in particular the South African strain. I know we've talked about Pfizer and Moderna working on a booster shot. What do you imagine is going on? What's the conversation like at Johnson and Johnson right now, at Novavax? I mean, they're still working to get federal approval for their vaccine. Do you imagine things change? Something changes with the vaccine? Do you think they seek a federal approval for the vaccine as it is, and then sort of think forward about a possible booster shot like the other companies are? What's the game plan?
Well, look, I mean, the fact that they both have significant effectiveness, even over 70%, is still very, very important. And it can be something that does help us combat it significantly. The most important thing is that they both are highly effective against severe COVID disease, which is where the morbidity, the mortality, that occurs with COVID-19 is offset. And you add that to therapeutics, which are still out there, and it gives us a real chance. So my guess is, as things stand today, they're going to proceed with their emergency use authorization request from the FDA, and likely already have folks who are considering the booster, what other issues, because the scientists are certainly taking that into account. The company, when they're doing these trials globally, are looking at where in South America versus South Africa, where are they most effective and why aren't they? And that's of great interest to these researchers. And then, of course, in the development of the vaccines.
Yeah. Bottom line, some level of protection is better than no level of protection whatsoever, right? I mean, when we're talking about these vaccines, that's
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, this is if someone is getting the severe disease, if they're likely to get it, these vaccines help ward that off. It doesn't even mean that everyone is even likely to get a severe form of it. So it has really good implications for the general population, and we definitely need those doses.
yeah, absolutely, we do. All the more important every day that goes on. All right, appreciate you coming on as always, Dr. Vanila Singh, clinical professor at Stanford School of Medicine and former chief medical officer with the Department of Health and Human Services. Always good to see you. We'll talk soon.
Thank you, Alex.
Thanks.